Greetings. This is TK Trav, aka Travis Magus, here with LVX777. Hope you're having a great evening. Today we're going to read a chapter of a practical guide to Kabbalistic symbolism that deals with the Sephirah Had. Had is represented by the planet Mercury. Mercury also signifies and rules over the day Wednesday. So, what a coincidence that we study this chapter on this day. Peace Frame Star Films. All right, so remember what we went over last time on this book in regards to the Sephirah Netzach and how it deals with victory. Victory as in coming over inertia, overcoming the natural obstacles that would hold creation locked at one level. The victory represented at Netzach is applying the force to overcome all those natural obstacles and reaching a new level. This is going to be counterbalanced by what we're going to read about today. Had deals less with the logical mind and less with the abstract mind and more with the logical mind, as we will soon find out. So let's begin. Peace, higher understanding. Who loves orange soda? Peace. Good evening. Good evening. Sholi Rue and the podcast crew. Peace, peace. Good to go. Okie doke. All right, so we're gonna just get right to it. I'm gonna flip the camera around and make sure I turn this thing on silent. Kevros, SS God, peace and greetings all the way in Arizona. Okay. Alicia M, peace. Good evening. All right, so this chapter on Had, the glory, begins on page 164. Doing some thinking, some meditating, and some talking, it might be wise for me to flesh out this lower level a bit more. Because as I've been looking over this, it seems like the jump from planetary consciousness to angel might be a bit sudden. And this could possibly benefit from being refined. Because as I look through the mythology of the Vedic system, I'm starting to see a few similarities with, of course, the Western magical system. Right now, one of the similarities I'm seeing is the fact that the elementals do play a role. And we were learning about the elementals the past few chapters of this book. And also, I had recently come across a short article that Swami Sivananda wrote about elementals. But I believe that those elemental spirits would be somewhere between the planetary and the angel aspect. They might actually be at this level. But we'll see. We'll see. I have a sneaky suspicion that the goetic spirits also tie into that elemental level. More research will prove it. I'm not going to make any assumptions just yet. Sunshine Chick, good evening. Peace. All right, so let's begin. Chapter 14, Hod, Glory. The eighth path is called the absolute or perfect intelligence because it is the mean of the primordial, which has no root, by which it can cleave or rest, save in the hidden places of Gijula, from which emanates its proper essence. And we know that Gijula is another name for Chesed. So just like in the last chapter, the Yetziratic text stated that Netzach has its root in Gibura. Well, this is saying that Hod has its root in Gidula. So we're seeing the relationship here. And also we've seen in this book and also in Dion Fortune's Mystical Kabbalah right here that the students who are realized on this level are constantly being guided and taught, educated by the masters on this level. And it only makes sense that the same thing would be happening for Netzach and Gibura. But let's continue. Peace, Matthew Watson. The magical image of Hod is a hermaphrodite. The god name is Elohim Zabaoth. The archangel is Mikhail in this book. In others, I've seen it as Raphael. So there's some interchangeability here with this archangel. The order of angels here is the B'nai Elohim, the sons of God. The mundane chakra is Mercury. The virtue is truthfulness. No titles, it seems. Spiritual experience is the vision of splendor. Now the color in Atziluth is violet purple. The color in Bria is orange. The color in the Yetziratic plane is red russet. And on the Asiatic plane, the color is yellowish black, flecked white. Now that becomes important once you start doing, I would say, advanced level meditation on these spheres. Because when you get to a certain point of refinement, you're no longer seeing shapes or images. At some point of refinement, really you're only guided by the colors that you encounter. That's the best way to put it, at least. And when I say a higher level of refinement, most people, if they were to meditate on these spheres, they're doing it from the surface level. From the surface level of the ego down to maybe the surface level subconscious mind. But when you're able to take yourself deep into meditation, just like what was talked about in chapters 2 and 3 of Gyan Yoga, he gives a 4 to 5 step process on achieving a deeper state of meditation, starting with stilling the body for step 1, Kaistherium, step 2 of stilling the mind, step 3 of becoming the observer, the drashta, the witness of the mind, and step 4, observing non-attachment and also discrimination while at that point. And then finally, the aspect of realizing godhood, even at a small scale. And realizing godhood would be done by what's called the 4 Mahavakyas. And these are basically statements from the Vedas that allow one to have an experience with the highest self. So if you're able to go through a meditation process like that and reach a certain depth of mind, then you'd be able to go past the childhood memory stage of memory and go a bit deeper into the hereditary memory, racial memory, or even the collective unconscious. But in these surface level states of meditation, it helps if you're able to visualize this Sephirah as the planet Mercury or as the archangel Mikhail here, or Raphael. But once you start going a bit deeper within yourself during meditation, you're going to be easily guided by the colors that you encounter. And that's why we have here the colors of this sphere in Atziluth, Bria, Yetzirah, and Asaya. Now, for all practical intents, most people are going to be able to work easily with the color scheme of Bria. That's what we have here. Because if you see here through all these chapters, it says the Briatic color is orange. Well, that's what we have here. This is the Briatic tree. So the color is going to be seen as orange. But if we were looking at this tree on the highest scale, it would be the Atziluth color. So all the colors of these spheres would actually be different. So hopefully that'll clear up a question someone may have about why they have these 4 different color scales for one Sephirah. because it depends on what level that you're visiting the Sephirah at. Peace, peace, Alora. Good evening. Arizona is in the house, finally. Ra, peace, peace. Al Dickey, good evening. Yes, yes. Peace and blessings to everybody. Breathe in that good ass prana. Or whatever he says. Sly, peace, peace. Just getting started. So, the vice of this sphere is falsehood, dishonesty, right? That's what happens when this sphere is out of order. You're living in a life and a mindset of falsehood and dishonesty. The virtue is living in truthfulness. All right, so the virtue lets us know how if this particular Sephirah is in order, balanced, harmonized in our day-to-day lives. The vice lets us know if it's out of balance. The symbols of this are going to be the names and versicles, an apron, and we're going to get into that. It's interesting to see that the magical image here would be a hermaphrodite. And if you look closely at this picture, that's what you see here standing. Whereas here you see it describes a strong naked man, and here a beautiful naked woman. Interesting how that triad lines up here, especially dealing with the masculine sphere, masculine pillar, and you've got the woman represented here. You got the feminine pillar, and it says here the hermaphrodite, and then you've got this middle balanced pillar, but the image is of a man. We shall see what the symbolism means in this chapter. All right. So like always, please like the video if you like this video, because YouTube uses that information to sort these type of videos in the good pile, which is where it belongs. All right, so verse 1. Hod is primarily the Sephirah of the forms of the concrete mind and intellect, and as form was first formed in Chesed or Gidula, right? Form was first formed up here, right? Up here we have the archetype, the essence, the very inklings of form, the form of a form, right? Here, when it crosses the abyss into the manifested dimension, even at its most subtle, this is where form actually begins. But this here is where we actually begin to perceive and cognize form to our material mind. I've said many times, by the time you reach this level in your meditation and your perception, or even when you die and you're coming back or leaving, this is going to be the last stage where you actually see form as you see it now. Like you can close your eyes and visualize shapes and colors and things. But by the time you get past this level of the lower astral plane, you're not really seeing anything like that anymore. You have to rely on a different set of senses. Again, this is where those colors come into play, because when you rise past this level, you have to rely on things like color and numbers and frequency, because you're getting closer and closer to the potential and further away from the manifestation, right? So you're dealing more with potential up here, but this is where the potential of form really begins to take shape, no pun intended. So what he says here is, Hod is primarily the Sephirah of the forms of the concrete mind and intellect. And as form was first formed in Chesed or Gidula, which is its diagonal opposite, the relationship between these two Sephirah is stressed in the Yetziratic text. It will be seen that Chesed is also a diagonal opposite of Binah, where the idea of form is first conceived. And so these three Sephirah are linked in this way, being regarded as under the presidency of water, just as Chokmah, Gibra, and Netzach are referred to fire, and the line of central Sephirah to air. So let's review that real quick, just to make sure we have a visual to what he just said. Okay, so he says that Hod is primarily the Sephirah of forms, all right, and the forms that the concrete mind and intellect can pick up. Okay, he said the relationship between this and this is that here is where the first form is brought into the picture, and here's where the expression of form begins to take shape. Now, if you notice here, Chesed is opposite of Hod, but guess what? Binah is also opposite of Hod. And what he says here is that Binah is where the idea of form is first conceived. right? Just like I said, across the abyss, this is where the idea of, not form, but the idea of form. We're talking seed level here. Binah can be seen as the garden, and this is the seed level here. But notice that these two spheres are diagonally opposite. You see the triangle being formed here? That's an indication of the relationship, of a relationship that these things share. But he also said that Hod is said to be under the presidency of water, just as Hakma, Gibra, and Netzach. So boom, boom, triangle here. That triangle is referred to fire. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, fire. And this triangle is referred to as water. We're dealing with form. Again, this is where the water element comes into play. And then on the opposite side, this is dealing with fire. And then, of course, the line of the central Sephirah is related to air. Symbolism and something to meditate on. Verse 2, as the human mind works in terms of form, it is obvious that Hod is the perfect or absolute intelligence. For when the forms are true, then they are the means by which man can come to grips with the formless verities of the primordial or supernatural regions of being. Stray Panther, peace, peace, bro. Hecate, good evening, good evening. Pablo X69, peace, peace. Amber D, peace. Greetings, Nuru. Nuru says Rupa, Rupa. Yes. Rupa. Rupa means form in the Sanskrit. So when you see a deity with the name Rupa in their name, like Shata Rupa, that has to do with form. Speaking of which, one of the things, like I said, I've been getting a bit deeper in the mythology, and one of the things that I've been seeing is that a lot of these entities represent different stages on this tree. So I'm actually getting pretty excited to dive deep into the mythology. Because, like I said, a lot of these deities represent a story that has to do with one of the levels that the tree is representing at any given point. Aldiki says, so could this be what was taught, that everything was created from water? That is a brilliant observation. Yes. Right. So what we're taught about is how creation arose from the waters. And think about the triad that was just mentioned there between Binah, which is also known as Mara, the Great Sea. Then we've got Had and Chesed or Gidula. All of these are dealing with form. All three of these deal with form. The great ocean from which the potential is pulled out of, the first pulling of form, and then the initial manifestation of form to the concrete mind. So we got a lot of initiators of form here. I would even be willing to say that this is a triangle of essence, where this is a triangle of expression, from Netzach to Gibra to Hakma. I can see that as a triangle of expression versus a triangle of essence. And it's through ponderings like that you start to tap into some of the subtleties of the tree. So yeah, that was an excellent observation there, Aldiki. Greetings, Cybernet. Cybernet says, big up the mages. Knowledge, context, application. Great work as usual. You planning to write a book as well? Absolutely, I am. Absolutely. Nuru, I've got to do some more research into Brahma and Brahman, because all this time I was reading that Brahma and Brahman were two different entities. But last night I was reading that at some point, some people consider them merged, maybe even representing the same entity, but on different levels. I'm gonna need to get myself Vedic mythology, Hindu mythology encyclopedia. So if anybody out there has encyclopedia on Hindu gods specifically, let me know if you know a good one. I have one that I have my eye on. Society Ejex pointed it out. But if anyone knows of any encyclopedia type book that is focused on Hindu mythology, let me know. It may be an upcoming book study. Kevin Wise, peace. Peace. Hope you're having a great day. Okay, so about form and about Had and how we're utilizing form here. It says, as the human mind works in terms of form, it is obvious that Had is the perfect or absolute intelligence. For when the forms are true, then they are the means by which man can come to grips with the formless verities of the primordial or supernal regions of the being. So in other words, like I've been saying, once you get past Had, form begins to decrease and the expression of force is more pure. But here's the thing, we're not refined enough to perceive reality at that level. So we utilize Yesod, we utilize Had, and we even utilize Netzach. It's called the astral triangle. We utilize these three aspects of our inner mind to be able to see through reflection these higher planes. The story that I say in my class is the same way that like NASA uses their technology to see space, right? We're not up there with our eyes. We can't actually see what's going on because some of these things are extremely distant. Matter of fact, supposedly, some of these stars are so far away that they're already dead. We're just seeing the light, supposedly. But anyways, we're not up there looking at it. We use a machine, we use math, we use different tools to see the reflection of what's beyond, right? We're not physically up there looking. We use computers, telescopes, and tools. Well, that's the same thing that we're doing with the astral triangle. That's the real purpose of doing etheric plane work and lower astral plane work. This is called the storehouse of images, right? So if there's no form in these higher levels, then how do we know what's going on? We look into the telescope, the spaceship, the computer program. We look into these tools to be able to read and see what's going on in these higher realms. And through what we reflect down here, it gives us a more solid, confident idea of what's beneath the surface. It's as if we have built a spaceship to the moon simply by looking at the reflection on the river. And by studying the reflection on the river, we're able to build the tools necessary to travel to the moon, to gauge the distance, right? That's the same thing we're doing with our images and our workings in this lower astral triangle. We're using these to understand what's going on at a higher plane. And eventually we become wise enough to understand what's going on even beneath the abyss, across the abyss. Check. Okay, so that's what he was saying here. So as far as Had being the perfect intelligence, why? Because when the forms of Had are true, then they are the means by which man can come to grips with the formless, right? So if the images that you're seeing in your meditations, if the images that you're seeing with your egregores or your work on different symbols and yantras, if these images are true, like the yantras are true, then you'll be able to tap into the formless. See, this is more than just a hexagram and a circle and a square. This is a form of something very subtle. And if you're able to meditate on it and use this as a tool, as an anchor, then you can tap into the essence of what it actually represents. And that's the whole science of working with yantra. And we learned from the book Mantra and Yantra how that's possible. These represent the subtle vibrations that affect and influence the elements. And we read what's happening by the effect that these symbols have on the elements. So yeah, we're able to use these forms to come to grips with the formless verities of the primordial or supernal regions of being. That's the top half of the tree. Yet form, when viewed from a primordial, supernal, or spiritual standpoint, has no reality. It has phenomenal, not nominal existence, right? So form viewed from the upper triad of the tree, so from this higher level of the unmanifest, from up here, looking down across the abyss, he says, form when viewed from the primordial or supernal or spiritual standpoint has no reality. So from up here across the abyss, form doesn't have a reality. It doesn't have a reality. It has a potential in Bina, has a potential in Kether, but it doesn't have an expression, doesn't have a reality, doesn't exist. This is the unmanifest aspect of the tree. So up here, looking down at all this, this doesn't exist. It's a potential when viewed from this high point. He says, form, when viewed from the primordial point, has no reality. It has a phenomenal, not nominal existence. It has an effect. It has an effect in the subjective plane, but no object of existence, right? And so the Yetziradic text states that these lower forms, however valuable they may be, have no basic reality, save in the hidden places of Gidula. So they have no reality, except in here, when it finally crosses the abyss, now form begins to have a reality in the hidden places of Gidula. So from up here, form is pure potential, nothing exists. Everything is a concept in the mind of the all. But once you cross the abyss, now form has a reality, and that reality is here. So there's that description of the triangle again. Form in its potential state, form beginning to express itself, form being expressed. I wonder how that lines up with the three gunas. Sattva, Tamas, Rajas. Sunshine Chick says God's concealment. Yeah, the hidden places, where it's not even so much hidden, it's just not perceived in the way that we would typically perceive it. So, these lower forms, however valuable they may be, have no basic reality except in the hidden places of Gijala, which would be more or less a Thoth condition where the spiritual forces are first taking on conditions of form. 3. Thus, it is that man anthropomorphizes his gods. The diverse aspect of God have their sphere of action in the lower worlds in the Sephirah Netzach, but Netzach is a force, not a form Sephirah. So the aspects of God, they have their sphere of action. They have their sphere of action here. The many forms of God has its sphere of action here, but the essence of God doesn't have a form yet. That happens here. He says here, Netzach is a force, not a form Sephirah. So over here we're dealing with force. Over here we're dealing with form. This pillar deals with force. This pillar deals with form. Therefore, the forces of nature and the internal forces of man are given picture images, and these images are formed in the Sephirah Had. It matters not whether the form be a gross or a naive one, such as the image of God the Father, or as an old man with a patriarchal beard and robes, or whether it be highly symbolic and subtle, such as the representation of the same concept as a point within a circle, or the smooth point. So he's saying it doesn't really matter if the form is extremely expressed or if it is still subtle. For example, this is a very subtle form of a symbol of the goddess. Whereas, let's see, I just passed a good one. What's this? This is a very gross form, right? Because it's fleshed out, it's very dense. You can see it. The symbology is a little bit more pronounced. Or in another case, let's see, there's plenty of symbols and pictures of these deities. Here's another. It's still highly symbolic, but it's the human mind can grasp this a little bit easier than we can grasp this. So this would be a subtle example, and then say like something like this would be a gross example, because it's very finely expressed. You can clearly see that, okay, this is a female, this is a goddess, it's a woman, she represents XYZ. But regardless if it's just a yantra or a full painting of God, regardless, he says an image is used and all mental images are formed under the lower cohering principle of Had. So all the God forms, right? The God forms being at the final level here, these archetypal forms. The God forms belong to Had, just as all the God forces belong to Netzach. That also reminds me how all these deities in the Vedic system, that they have a consort, right? They're Shiva and they're Shakti. Now Shiva represents the context, Shakti represents the power. And he says here, so all the God forms belong to Had, just as all the God forces belong to Netzach. We could even compare these two pillars to Shiva, which is, this side would be form, this side would be force, but that kind of flips around at the bottom. Nope, I stand corrected. This is still this is the pillar of form. This is still the pillar of force. So the God forms belong to this level. The God forces belong to this level. The Shakti principle, the Shiva principle. So even if we look at the diagram from Thoth with Shooty, we still see that happening with the left and the right. The Shiva principle on the left, form. The Shakti principle on the right, force. Nura says, Brahman is the all, is formless. Brahman is not created, but pre-exists, is the original substance of consciousness, like a state of pre-being itself. Brahma is a lower created god with wives, etc. Greetings, Reina Leona. Reina Leona says, hey, just listening in. Love to the chat and Travis. Peace, peace. MC Maestro says Shakti isn't form. Yes, absolutely it was. I got mixed up on those two terms. All right, so an image is used and all mental images are formed under the lower cohering principle of Had. So all the God forms belong to Had, just as all the God forces belong to Netzach. Number 4, the skeptic may object that all forms are reflected images of the physical world, and so in the unlikely event of a skeptical materialist being a Kabbalist, he would no doubt insist that all forms belong to Malkuth. Given the materialist's premises, this would be correct, but the Kabbalah is based implicitly on an idealist philosophy and holds that forms are first conceived on the inner levels and subsequently concrete into forms. This is no place to go into an analysis of the main watershed of philosophical speculation, a materialist or idealist conception of the universe. Even if such an analysis would be likely to be of any value, most philosophies are sound, logical structures, and their diversity stems basically from whatever premises they are built on. And as most premises is, even when they contradict each other, are held to be self-evident and thus axiomatic, there is little to be gained from logical disquisitions on them. In the last analysis, you pays your money and you takes your choice, and the choice of the Kabbalist is the idealist viewpoint. 5. All philosophies, in that they are structures of formalized concepts, come under the presidency of Had. And their only ethic is whether they are true or false, which is the essence of the virtue and vice of this Sephirah. Falsehood can be termed an error and could be conceived as part of the scheme of things, for it is a fruit of inexperience, and the aim of evolution is to gain experience. Dishonesty, however, where it is conscious, and even when it is unconscious for that matter, is a deliberate perversion, therefore qliphothic and evil, and thus has no real part in the scheme of things, but is another foul fruit of man's prime deviation. 6. The god name of the Sephirah, Had, is similar to that of Netzach, being Elohim Sabaoth, god of hosts, as compared to Jehovah Sabaoth, lord of hosts. In Netzach, the hosts are the myriad forces of lower worlds, whereas in Had, they are the myriad forms which serve to clothe these forces. So again, it sounds like it's representing that Shiva Shakti principle. In Netzach, the hosts are the myriad forces of the lower worlds, whereas in Had, they are the myriad forms which serve to clothe those forces. There is an interesting field of speculation in why Netzach should have Jehovah as the first part of the name of God, and Had have Elohim. As we've already discussed, Jehovah refers to the manifestation of forces on different planes, and so the name is applicable to Netzach as it gives insights to relationships of forces at all levels. Jehovah refers to the manifestation of forces on different planes. I have a book that has a list of the god names in order. Let me figure out which one that is. So, The Complete Conjuring Spirits, a manual of modern sorcery. On page 15, we've got this chart that shows the different archangels and god names. So, we're currently at Mercury. And in this book, he's considering Raphael as the archangel. In the book that we're currently studying, they're considering Mikhail as the archangel at this level. But I'm of a mind to go with Mikhail with Tifereth and Raphael with Mercury. But as we can see here, we've got Jehovah in the name of the Bina god name. We've got Jehovah in the name of Had, and we've got Jehovah in the world of Tifereth. What I can see here is we got Bina, Had, and Tifereth. So that's Bina, Had, and Tifereth. Not quite the triangle we were looking at earlier, but there seems to be some relationship here. So the god name of Had, Tifereth, and Bina all have Jehovah in it. Bina, Tifereth, Had. And what did he say here in this book? He says that there's an interesting field of speculation in why Netzach would have Jehovah as the first part of the name of God, and Had have Elohim. As we've already discussed, Jehovah refers to the manifestation of forces on different planes. And so the name is applicable to Netzach as it gives insights to relationships of forces at all levels. And what we also see is that Elohim happens in 3 places. It happens at Bina as well. It also happens at Netzach, and it happens at Gibera. So Bina, Gibera, and Netzach. That's where we're seeing the word Elohim. more connections here, here, and here. Look into that a little bit more later. Elohim, on the other hand, is a name having polarity and plurality implicit in it, the many in the form of one. The many in the form of one. And Hod is a Sephirah where logical structures are made, which process is one of finding a coherent unity to diverse aspects. It will be noted that the magical image of Hod is a hermaphrodite, a form which, like Elohim, has duality and polarity implicit in one form. Also, the names Jehovah and Elohim first appear in Chokmah and Binah, respectively. Chokmah and Binah. Okay, so also the names Jehovah and Elohim first appear in Chokmah and Binah, respectively, of which, according to the principle of similarity of diagonally opposite Sephiroth, Netzach and Hod are lower forms. In other words, in that sense, he's saying that Netzach and Hod are lower forms of Chokmah and Binah. When the glyph of the pillars is superimposed on the tree of life, Chokmah and Netzach are at the head and the base of the I haven't seen that word, Akve pillar of force. Okay, so when the glyph of the pillars is superimposed on the tree of life, Chokmah and Netzach are at the head and base of the Akve pillar of force, and Binah and Hod are at the head and base of the passive pillar of form. 7. The archangel of Hod is Mikhail, the great guardian who holds at bay the forces of the underworld. In magical working, he is assigned to the south, the fire quarter, and can be visualized as a great columnar figure blazing with all the reds of fire. Alternatively, the familiar anthropomorphic form can be used of a mighty winged being with sword upraised, crushing a dragon or serpent beneath his feet. The archangel is the one to be called upon when assaulted by danger or unbalanced force of any nature, including the uprush of averse and demonic aspects within oneself. MC Maestro says Yahweh on all planes like the Indriyas. Yeah, Yahweh on all planes just like the Indriyas. Kind of like what we discussed on Sunday, how these Indriyas, the organs of action and knowledge, have an expression on the 5 planes of existence, not just the physical plane, but also in the etheric, the astral, the mental, and the causal. In other words, on the dense physical plane, we've got our 5 senses. But on the etheric plane, the astral plane, we have those senses as well in a higher form. So instead of gross vision, we have clairvoyance on a higher level. Instead of gross hearing, we have clairaudience on a higher level, etc., etc. MC Maestro says, or Thoth was, since they're more subtle, with L as the Indriyas. Peace, L-Dub. Okay, so that was a brief explanation as to why Mikhail is the angel to call upon when you feel overwhelmed or assaulted by danger. That's why a lot of people call on the Archangel Michael or Mikhail when facing evil or some type of opposition, because Mikhail deals with the balancing of unbalanced force. And that's what evil is considered as from a Kabbalistic perspective. Evil isn't necessarily a person with bad intentions. Evil is unbalanced force, especially since the tree is a representation of cosmic balance. So the only thing evil here would be imbalance. And Mikhail is the archangel assigned to correcting that. And to me, that would make sense why Mikhail should be assigned to Tifereth as opposed to Hod. Because Tifereth is in the very center of the tree, literally balancing all the forces. Whereas I could see Raphael being assigned to Hod and being the intelligence that balances the forms in alignment with the forces of Netzach. But you'll see in Hod, one of the symbols is an angel holding a scale. MC Maestro says Yahweh on all planes like the Indriyas or Tattvas, since they're more subtle, with El as the Indriyas. Yahweh as Sattvic, El as Tamasic. Sattvic, Tamasic. Okay. Number 8. The element of fire is that element which transmutes forms to a higher level, and so is associated with Mikhail by reason of the fact that he deals similarly with unregenerate forms and forces. Fire is the purging element, as Mikhail is the purging archangel. As Hod is a water Sephirah, it may seem strange that the archangel of fire should be assigned to it, but the process of mentation of Hod, which is logic and science, the categorizing the unknown into knowable structures, is a shedding of light into dark places. And one of humanity's greatest fears is the fear of the unknown. It is this past passion for logical categorizing that has led to the existentialist jibe that all pre-existential philosophies have been attempts to escape from facing a universe which is illogical or absurd. Be that as it may, and there is more than a grain of truth in it, even if the universe is not a structure of meaningless absurdity, there remains the fact that ignorance is the breeding ground of much evil, and that ignorance is dispersed by the light of the mind in Hod. Thus, the attribution of Mikhail, the disperser of the forces of darkness, is a correct one. Okay, so one of the reasons that he's assigning Mikhail to Hod is because Mikhail is associated with the element of fire, and the fire brings light. Fire transmutes and transforms. In this case, the fire and the light associated with Mikhail transmutes ignorance into knowledge. The same way that you would shine the light into a dark corner and the light would actually reveal what's there. So in this case, the fire of Mikhail transforms ignorance into knowledge. And one of humanity's greatest fears, our greatest ignorance, is fear of the unknown. Mikhail helps to alleviate that by revealing that which is unknown through his light of spiritual fire. And Hod is associated with that because Hod represents, like he says here, the passion for logical categorizing, which is what a lot of philosophy has done, tried to give us a logical categorization of what's happening in the abstract planes. But a lot of people are saying that in the past, pre-existential philosophies have been attempts to escape from facing a universe which is illogical or absurd. Some people are saying that the root of philosophy is to escape facing a universe which makes absolutely no sense. And while that may be true somewhat, there's truth to that, but the universe is not a structure of meaningless absurdity. However, ignorance is the breeding ground of much evil, and that ignorance is dispersed by the light of the mind in Had, Gyan Yoga. So verse 9. Framestar Film says Gabriel with water, though, not Raphael. Yeah, there's a lot of things going on here. A lot of things going on here. So we have associated Gabriel with Yesod, or we will, actually. And Yesod typically deals with the water element. That's pretty consistent here. But what he's saying here is that from a perspective, the triangle of Bina, Chesed, and Had also represent the water element. And if I'm not mistaken, in the book, the Qabalistic Tarot, there's some association with the so-called mother letters. And one of those mother letters, I believe, is Mem, dealing with water. Yeah, because there's a difference between what they refer to as the base elements, the primordial elements, and specific elements, and the astral elements. And let's see here. Dealing with the astral plane, we've got Yod, He, Vav, He for Netzach, Had, Yesod, and Malkuth. I'll have to do some more digging through this part and compare what the designation of these elements are. Because now I'm seeing Had associated with with air, fire, and water all at once. And I'm pretty sure it has to do with this right here. I'll just read this real quick for anyone who's interested. So on this portion right here, we're talking about number 1. So I'll show the image here, and I'll read what it's talking about. So number 1 is talking about primordial elements, which are found in Kether, that represents undifferentiated potential. So you see that in Kether. You'll also see it in Malkuth. That's the first level. The second level, we're talking about, let's see, so that's primordial elements. Then he's talking about primal elements, and that's the Yod, He, Vav, He applied to the 4 worlds. So the primal elements is taking place here. The Yod of Atziluth, the He of Bria, the Vav of Yetzirah, the He of Asaya. That's the primal elements. The transitional elements, and we're seeing that down here, the transitional elements, the Yod, He, Vav, He, which are maternals on the path of the tree of life. So that's what I was talking about. The mother letters, they actually relate to the paths. So we see air dealing with this path up here where the Fool card is represented. We see water represented here between Had and Gibura. And then we see fire between Had and Malkuth. So there we're seeing water and fire together, which would probably help to explain why Had has an association with both water and fire in this case. Okay, and then after the transitional elements, he talks about specific elements, which is here. And he says the specific elements, The Yod-He Vav-He is applied to Chokmah, Bina, Tifereth, and Malkuth in any of the four worlds. So you'll see this with the tarot cards. The Yod deals with the kings of the elements. So that's going to deal with Chokmah. So the King of Wands, which is the king of the fire element, the King of Cups, Swords, Pentacles. And then the queens of those elements are going to represent Bina at different levels. Then likewise the knights and the pages. More correspondences, basically. The astral elements, which is here, deals with the Yod-He Vav-He applied to the four lower Sephiroth. So that's dealing with Netzach, Hod, Yesod, and Malkuth. And then finally, the base elements, right here, the base elements are found in Malkuth blended. The ultimate expression of the outpouring of the universe into matter. Taken together, the base elements are a subdivision of astral earth. More correspondence, basically. If you have this book, it's on page 43. If not, maybe this will be something to screenshot. But this is basically showing you how the aspect of Yod-He Vav-He in relation to the elements line up with the tree in different ways. Oh yeah, awesome, Framestar, thank you. He says male and female, water and fire, hermaphroditism. Yes, so that's what we're seeing right here. It says here the water and the fire, boom and boom. They join in the Sephirah pot. Cool. And just real quick, also, Tree of Life pattern as looking at the four worlds as if they were stacked on one tree. And sometimes you'll see it slightly different. Sometimes you'll see Atziluth attributed to only Kether. And then you'll see that Bria includes Chokmah and Bina only. And then Yetzirah would include from this point to this point. And then you'd see Asaya as just Malkuth. So depending on what system, you'll see that Bria and Yetzirah may change a little bit. All right, let's get back to it. So we just talked about how Gareth Knight and Dion Fortune both relate Mikhail to Hod and their reasoning why. With fire being a transformative element, Mikhail is the archangel of fire. Fire brings light. Light transmutes the ignorance of darkness into knowledge, which brings balance to unbalanced force, just like Darth Vader. So, number 9. It is an interesting fact that the Christian church has long used Mikhail as a protector and guardian, though prefixing his name with the title of saint. There must be hundreds of places dedicated to Saint Michael, as they are usually sites of pagan worship, and thus frequented, according to medieval Christian belief, by devils. These sites are often on high places or hillocks, and the most famous are St. Michael's Mount, near Penzance, Cornwall, and Mont St. Michael, off the coast of Brittany. Also, the tower on Glastonbury Tor, part of the holiest earth in England, is part of a church originally dedicated to St. Michael. The rest of the church, it is said, was demolished by earthquake, leaving only the standing tower, a pagan symbol, so perhaps the old forces have won here. One does not need to take this too seriously, though, for the differences between pagan and Christian worship of God are really quite superficial. The differences between pagan and Christian worship of God are really quite superficial. Basically, it is one worship and one God. I was also reading earlier about how we typically think of the Hindu pantheon as, a pantheon dealing with hundreds of gods. And the same thing with the Egyptian pantheon. We think of all these multitudes of gods. But if you really look at the Kemet system, the Egyptian system, and you really look at the system of the Hindu deities, They're truly an expression of one God in multiple different forms. And I think that that should be clear, especially looking at how each of those deities reincarnate into different forms to work on different levels. And even some gods are reincarnations of others or manifestations of others. Interesting that we're on this chapter, and just last night I was studying about Mohini, who is an incarnation of Vishnu. And I say interesting because that's one of the few times that you'll see one of the male deities incarnate as a female for a specific reason. So, 10. The order of angels, the B'nai Elohim, or sons of God, or sons of the gods, can be conceived as working in conjunction with the order of angels of Netzach, the Elohim, or gods. These two orders of angels could be considered as the force and form aspects of all the various gods and goddesses conceived by the mind of man. Remember how he was talking about the Sephirah Tifereth can be seen as a prism with the white light shining through it and then setting up into different colors and different aspects. So that's what we're seeing beneath Tifereth, the one light being separated into different colors. The white light coming down into Tifereth and being separated into the different force and form aspects of the multiple gods. Kefri the God, peace. So yeah, these two orders of angels could be considered as the force and form aspects of all the various gods and goddesses conceived by the mind of man. The term son means an esoteric relationship, as can be seen by Christ's naming two of his disciples Boanerges, sons of thunder, and Christ himself is known as the Son of God and Son of Man, the former not being entirely derived from the belief in the Immaculate Conception by the Holy Spirit. Oh boy. 11. The mundane chakra of Hod is the planet Mercury, the physical planet which stands closest to the sun and receives more light than any other. It is closely involved esoterically with Venus and the Earth and is associated with the psychic level of the abstract mind. It has much to do with the mysteries of Hermes. 12. Hermes has given his name to a complete occult tradition, the Hermetic ray, which is the way of enlightenment through the mind. I've been talking about the Hermetic path versus the Orphic path. Here we go. Hermes has given his name to a complete occult tradition, the Hermetic ray, which is the way of enlightenment through the mind. That should also sound like Gyan Yoga. I love how it all connects. On time, too. Hod, then, is very much the sphere of esoteric philosophy and magic. The three main paths of Western occultism can be aligned with the lower Sephirah. Okay, let's see. The green ray of nature mysticism and art refers to Netzach, the purple ray of devotional mysticism to Yesod. Okay. And the orange ray of magic and occult philosophy to Hod. So he just gave us three different things that can be researched separately. The green ray of nature, mysticism, and art refers to Netzach. So the style of magic associated primarily with mysticism and art, that goes to Netzach. The purple ray of devotional mysticism to Yesod. Right? So we could even see Bhakti here. And then he says the orange ray of magic and occult philosophy to Hod. All three paths unite, however, at the level of Tifereth. The key figures on each path are Orpheus, our Lord, and Hermes, respectively. Interesting, interesting. So we've got three different paths, and I was only talking about two. We got the Hermetic path, we got the Orphic path, and then we've got the Christian path, the Christ path. So those are three different paths of Hermetic science. And then he said here was devotion, but he didn't assign a deity to it. So the Hermetic path of enlightenment through the mind, the Orphic path of enlightenment through nature and art, and then the way of enlightenment through the Christ consciousness. But all of these are reached by the science of devotion. So devotion to the work, devotion to nature, or devotion to Christ, or the Christ aspect. That doesn't necessarily mean a Christian as you know it, but W.E. Butler was a Christian occultist. So there is definitely a path for that. The Bible is an occult text. Interesting. Peace naturally natured. Okay, so verse 13. Hermes Trismegistus goes under several variations of name, Mercurius Termaximus and thrice greatest Hermes being Roman and English equivalents of the Greek form, which probably derived from the Egyptian Thoth Tahuti. We already know that. The highest aspect was as the divine Pymander. Pymander means shepherd of men and signifies the archetypal leader, teacher, and illuminator of mankind. He is a being, however, who works principally through teaching of the mind rather than through the emotions or religious faith, as is hinted in an extract from some of Hermetic writings. Have me in thy mind, and whatever thou wouldst learn, I will teach thee. And Emerson was moved to write, I cannot recite, even thus rudely, laws of the intellect, without remembering that lofty and sequestered class who have been its prophets and oracles, the high priesthood of the pure reason, the Trismegisti, the expounders of thought from age to age. When at long intervals we turn over their abstruse pages, wonderful seems the calm and grand air of these great spiritual lords who have walked in the world, these of the old religion, this band of grandees, Hermes, Heraclitus, Empedocles, Plato, Plotinus, Proclus, Synesius, Olympiodorus, and the rest have somewhat so vast in their logic, so primary in their thinking, that it seems antecedent to all the ordinary distinctions of rhetoric and literature, and to be at once poetry and music and dancing, and astronomy and mathematics. Straight Panther says, just got Gyan Yoga today. Awesome. Awesome. Hopefully that's one that you're able to look into for a long time to come. Verse 14. The secret of the logic of these Hermetic philosophers is that it is based upon truth, and so speaks to the intuition as well as to the lower mind. Unenlightened philosophies can be farragos of nonsense. Yes, they can. Unenlightened philosophies can be farragos of nonsense, although their structure may be completely logical, simply because they are not based on truth. We've seen plenty of that. One can build up a great, imposing, logical edifice, but the ultimate worth of it will depend upon its foundations, whether it's built upon the rock of truth or the shifting sands of personal opinion. You ever see somebody present a philosophy and call it spiritual, but it's really just based on their personal opinion? Or as they say, I'm just speaking my truth, as if there are different versions of the truth. Interesting. So yeah, unenlightened systems can be farragos of nonsense. The structure might make sense, right? But if it's not based on truth, then it doesn't matter how well it's put together. One can build up a great imposing logical edifice. You can make it sound great, but the ultimate worth of it will depend upon its foundations. Because really, you can build a whole system on something that isn't necessarily true, right? We can sit here and talk about how, I don't have to give examples, you guys know. We can build a whole philosophy on melanin or the demiurge or the archons or, all the different things that people are talking about. But is it based on truth or is it based on an opinion? That's where we really boil it down to. I don't care how good it sounds. What's the foundation of this thing? Is it built upon the rock of truth or the shifting sands of personal opinion? Again, this refers us back to the vice and virtue of the Sephirah Had, truth and falsity. According to Clement of Alexandria, the whole of Egyptian religious philosophy was contained in the books of Thoth. Thoth, the lord of books and learning, Tahuti, Hermes, right? The lord of books and learning, was regarded as the inspirer of all sacred writings and the teacher of all religion and philosophy. Furthermore, as Iamblichus tells us, Thoth was the president of all priestly discipline, and every Egyptian priest was held to be a priest of Thoth over and above his other priestly functions, because Thoth was the archetypal priest or hierophant, the oversoul of all priests. The oversoul of all priests. So regardless of what time period you're born in, if you are a priest of the science of know thyself, at some point, you're a child of Thoth. And see, this is where I'd probably go deeper. This is where the archetypes come into play, right? If someone is a manifestation of Tahuti, right, we'd be looking at a soul that has a lot of expression in this realm. A lot of people talk about how they're an incarnation of this, or they represent this deity or whatever. That's taking place at a very deep archetypal level. And regardless of what time or place you incarnate in, if you were able to go into deep meditation, you'd probably find what archetype that you're related to, so to speak. So it isn't necessarily that somebody that says that they're an incarnation of a specific entity. That doesn't mean that they necessarily are that specific entity come to Earth to save mankind. It's just saying that their essence can be traced to a specific origin. MC Maestro says, kind of like choosing your god in initiation to Hermetics. Step 10. The priest by default would choose Tahuti. Right. See, I wouldn't choose Ares. You know what I'm saying? I wouldn't choose Zeus. It just doesn't fit. As a matter of fact, I would even wager that you don't choose it. It chooses you. You reveal what's already there. Stray Panther 79 says Thoth has been coming up a lot lately. Hecate, I know you know about Thoth for sure. Let's continue. The oversoul of all priests. Nuru says, look at the relation and similarity between these words. Thoth, king, Tut, Tat as in Tat Tvam Asi, that I am, and Buddha Gautama's nickname, Tathagata, thus come, this gone. Oh, yeah, that's good. I'm going to write that down. Thoth, King Tut, Tat Tvam Asi, which is one of the 4 Mahavakyas. Thus come, thus gone, Tathagata. Interesting. As has already been mentioned under Netzach, Thoth can be regarded as the balancing power on the higher planes, as Orpheus is the balancing power on the lower. This does not imply that one is greater than the other, for all the Sephiroth, and thus all the planes, are equally holy. All the Sephiroth and all the planes are equally holy. That includes Malkuth. Hod, as it is a lower reflection of Chesed, is a link between humanity and all teachers on the higher planes, whether they be masters, that is, highly evolved humans, or lords of mind. So now we're talking about that connection between the students and the ascended masters, the relationship between the two, Hod and Chesed. So Hod is, as it is, a lower reflection of Chesed, is a link between humanity and all teachers on the higher planes. The same way that a certain guru might have been taught by another guru, he isn't out here promoting himself. He's actually promoting, or not even promoting, but giving respect to his teacher, who is still teaching on a higher plane, right? We don't have access to Satyananda. I bet you Niranjanananda does. Probably more so than anyone else. Vincent L. Cristol, peace. Wow. Straight Panther says, haha, I just saw a Thoth invocation on my YouTube recommendation page. Can't make this up. Good stuff. Check them out. Oh boy. Yes. Hod, as it is a lower reflection of Chesed, is a link between humanity and all teachers on the higher planes, whether they be masters, which means highly evolved humans, or lords of mind. The lords of mind are perfected beings of a previous evolution, and Hermes, Merlin, Buddha, and the individual spirit of Jesus of Nazareth, i.e. Jesus as apart from the Christ force, have been said to be of that evolution. The technique of teaching of the lords of mind is always the linking up of some of the divine reason with the higher mind of man, buddhi. In other words, they give knowledge, jnana, of God as distinguished from awareness of God, which last is the method of the Venus teachers such as Orpheus. Okay, so that's a distinguishing factor right there. So here's the technique of the lords of mind. So he said the technique is linking up the divine reason with the higher mind, right? The mind of God with the buddhi. In other words, this is what he says. In other words, they give knowledge of God as distinguished from awareness of God. So those on the Orphic path, they experience an awareness of God through art, through nature, through beauty. Whereas on this side, we're gaining knowledge of God through study, through practice. So he says, in other words, they give knowledge of God as distinguished from awareness of God, which last is the method of Venus teachers such as Orpheus. The inner priesthoods, known as the Order of Prometheus and the Order of Melchizedek, derive from Mercury and Venus, respectively. The Order of Prometheus, Lucifer, son of the morning, and the Order of Melchizedek. Interesting. Weren't we talking about Prometheus, the movie, just last night? Love it. Though there are the forces of certain constellations working behind these planets. What's up, Louis? Welcome, welcome. Oh yeah. So also, this is coming up for a reason. Maybe not necessarily for everybody right now, but the Hermetic path and the Orphic path has been coming to surface. And as we study this, it might be good to consider, like what he says here, the inner priesthoods, known as the Order of Prometheus and the Order of Melchizedek, derive from Mercury and Venus respectively, though there are the forces of certain constellations working behind these planets. So since we're now realizing that, like, everyone knows that this is the pillar of severity and the pillar of mercy. Not everyone, but many people who know Kabbalah or know of Kabbalah know that we've got the pillar of severity and the pillar of mercy. But there's more to it now. We've got the Hermetic path and the Orphic path. And we know that the connection behind the Hermetic path relates to Chesed and Bina. And the connection behind the Orphic path relates to Gibura and Chokmah. So when he says that there's constellations working behind these planets, it might be good to consider which path you naturally gravitate to. In this case, if it's the Hermetic path, there's some consideration that should be taken to Gijula, Chesed, and Bina, and the connection behind them and how it all relates. L Dub says, after visiting the King Tut exhibit, I astral traveled the following days. Awesome. I bet that was pretty intense, especially considering what you had just encountered. Peace, y'all, Micah. Framestar Film says both linked by the Hermit card also. And as we can see here to the diagram, this is where the Hermit card usually lies. So check that out. We've got the Devil and the Hermit card in between Chesed and Had. Devil, Hermit. And considering the Orphic path between Netzach and Gibura, we've got Justice and Death. Interesting. Okay, let's keep going. 17. It may be strange that Jesus should be considered in relation to the Hermetic ray, as he is primarily a teacher on the love aspect of God. However, it must be remembered that no aspect can be considered without the others, and they all interlink. Many people are anxious to give themselves up to wisdom in spite of the fact that they lack the necessary basis for it. This basis is love, for compassion in its true sense fertilizes wisdom, so that right use is made of it. Many leaders of esoteric groups who, by their wisdom bias, are led to the field of teaching have personalities in which the love aspect is not adequately developed. True wisdom cannot be present without the other logoidal aspects, for as the Athanasian Creed says of the wisdom principle of the Logos, it is neither made, created, nor born, but proceeding. The images of Hod are not the same as those of Yesod, which is called the treasure house of images. They are forms made and controlled by mind and will and reflected in the great water temple of Hod. They are images of eternity, often conceived and placed there by higher beings to be picked up by man and meditated upon to give subsequent revelation, and the vision of splendor that is the spiritual experience of Hod. The water of Hod is not the elemental water, but the crystal clear well of truth. Oh boy. I'll read that again, in case you didn't catch anything profound from that. Number 18. The images of Hod are not the same as those of Yesod, which is known as the treasure house of images. They are forms made and controlled by mind and will, and reflected in the great water temple of Hod. They are images of eternity, often conceived and placed there by higher beings to be picked up by man and meditated upon to give subsequent revelation, and the vision of splendor that is the spiritual experience of Hod. The water of Hod is not the elemental water, but the crystal clear well of truth. Something to consider when working with some of these yantras or symbols. Why are we even looking at this? I can probably recall the earliest point in my life where the Kabbalah appeared to me, or the image of the tree of life, I should say. And that would have to be probably around 2003, 2004, maybe even 2002. I had this album from a band called Mudvayne, and when you open up the CD case, the first thing you see is the tree of life, and it's kind of stylized to look like chemical formulas. I forgot the name that they use for that diagram, where like you'll see H2O, but it's written as like the circle with the line, just like the tree of life is. But anyways, I didn't choose that symbol. It appeared to me, and I fell in love with that band and that album, so that I constantly saw that logo every time I opened it up. And of course, being a young person, I studied the artwork in the album. So I'm looking at this yantra, and I'm adding emotion to it, and I'm getting connected to it and attached to it, and I'm developing reaction to it. And it wasn't until many years later that I actually tapped into what that symbol actually was. It never struck my mind to even think about it. I just thought it was a cool design, but it was literally in my face since I was a kid. And I said that to comment on what he says here, right? That the images in Hod, they're different from the images of Yesod, which is the realm of imagination, the etheric plane. See, the realm of the etheric plane, we have direct influences to the image here. We have access to it. That chart that I keep showing over here, right? That chart is a representation of our interaction with the images here. But the images on a higher arc now, we're going into the lower astral plane. The images up here in Hod, these are a reflection of the archetypal images. So these aren't anything that we come up with. The images here are pushed into our awareness. By who? These images are pushed into our awareness by a higher, more refined intelligence than ours. The same way that tree of life was pushed into my intelligence back in 2003. I didn't choose that. But it took another 11, 12 years for me to even understand what the hell it was I was seeing. I wonder when was the first time that you were able to see the tree of life design? When did it enter your awareness? MC Maestro says, how does the Orphic Path Netzach relate to grimoires? Well, that is a question that I was trying to avoid, but since you asked it, I'll at least give a clue or a hint. I think that when the Goetia talks about the legions, the nameless legions, well, they're nameless for a reason because they're part of the masses or the horde that is represented in Netzach, whereas the Goetic spirits themselves are definitely linked to the sphere of Had. The Goetic spirits themselves, as we know them, the 72, are absolutely linked to this sphere. Now, each one of the Goetic spirits have a certain number of legions under their command. That's representing what's going on in Netzach. So we're talking about the force and the form. We have the form of the Goetic spirits. We've got the 72 sigils. We've got a description of their qualities and what they do, what their effect is on nature. But we don't have a description of their legions because we give form to them as we choose them, select them, and work with them. So while we may be working with Fur or Amdusius or whatever Goetic spirit, through them we access their legions, and through their legions we access the higher planes of influence. We just use the specific Goetic spirits as a focal point. But yeah, to answer your question, this is the sphere of the spirits. This is the sphere of their legions. Now, how can I say Had is absolutely the sphere of the 72 spirits? How can I say that with confidence? Well, it is somewhat well known that each one of the planetary spheres here with the Tree of Life does deal with its own realm of spirits. And if we look at what is mentioned here in the practice of magical evocation, the Mercury sphere, or the sphere of Had, deals with the 72. And guess what? That means both the Goetic spirits and the archangels. Excuse me, the Goetic spirits and the Shemhammephorash angels. Jewel, good evening. Tree Marie, peace, peace. Good to see you. Okay, let's continue. So, verse 19. In this category of symbolic forms can be placed all the main pictorial systems of esoteric teaching, such as Hebrew letters, the astrological signs, and the tarot, which the latter is often called the Book of Thoth. And you'll see in this book here, the Qabalistic Tarot, they refer to it as the Book T, or the Book of T. Now, before I thought that was meaning the Book of Tarot, but as we see here, it means the Book of Thoth. Cool. So the Book of Thoth, which is another word for the tarot. The origin of the tarot cards is shrouded in obscurity, being placed by some authorities as far back as the Egyptian mysteries, and by others as late as the 16th century. However, this type of scholastic research matters nothing, for their true origin comes from the inner planes, and their authority derived not from the date of their physical inception, but from their use as a practical system here and now. I'll read that again. This type of scholastic research matters nothing, for their true origin comes from the inner planes, and their authority derives not from the date of their physical inception, but from their use as a practical system here and now. And this is how we deal with spiritual systems. It's not necessarily how long it's been here, but how does it work? How practical is it? How is it useful? Is it appropriate, right? Are you going to drop something useful for something that's been here for a long time, even if that's not useful? The beauty of this Vedic information is that not only has it been here for an extraordinary long time, but it's also extremely practical and useful here and now. Good stuff. 20. The mythological attributes of the Egyptian Thoth give a general picture of the attributions of the Sephirah Hod. He was depicted with the head of an ibis whose long beak can be likened to the analytical mind picking out the morsels of truth from the swampy waters of falsity. So there's a symbol why that animal may have been chosen as the head of Tahuti, with the long beak to pick out truth scattered amongst all the mud from the swampy waters of falsity. He was also a moon god, having the crescent moon upon his head. The heavenly body which brings reflected light to the dark hours of earth, as the reflections and symbols of the higher powers of Chesed bring light to the mind of man in Hod. So the same way that the moon, which is leaving its fullness right now, the same way that the moon brings light to us in the night, is the same way that Chesed brings knowledge to us in our ignorance. The same way that Chesed reflects knowledge to us, the same way that the moon reflects light to us in the nighttime. Apart from being the demiurge in Hermopolis, the city of 8, he was also a divine judge or balancer, and his action at the heavenly tribunal before which the implacable enemies Horus and Set appeared earned him the title of he who judges the two companions. He tried to slip that in there, see that? Apart from being the demiurge in Hermopolis, the city of 8, and also Hod is the 8th sphere of the Kabbalah. He was also divine judge or balancer. And that's why we see here the image of the angel holding the scales of balance. You see that there? Holding the scales. If you get a blown up picture of that cover, you'll actually see there's a lot of detail in each one of those spheres. You can't really pick up all the detail in the book cover. He also helped Isis to defend the child Horus from danger and drove out the poison from the child's body when it was stung by a scorpion. This is analogous to the duties and powers of the archangel Mikhail. Thoth was also the inventor of all arts and sciences and of hieroglyphs, and the first of all magicians. He distinctly had attributes besides being herald of the gods, as was Hermes, the Greek counterpart of Thoth, and also the Roman Mercury, in that the images of Hod are symbols of divine import. The attribution of messenger as well as magician is fairly obvious. The attribution of messenger as well as magician is fairly obvious. And that's the similarity we have between Thoth, Hermes, Mercury, Hod. 21. In analyzing the attributes of a god in this way, relationships of divine aspects can be deduced. There is much significance in the relationship of Thoth with Isis, Horus, Osiris, and Set, for example, and Hermes with Pallas, Athene, Perseus, Apollo, and Zeus. Generally speaking, the Egyptian myths are purer because the Egyptian civilization was a very rigid one, always strictly under the control of the priesthood. What would life be like instead of being under the rigid control of the politicians? The Greek was not so, And while the Greek divinities may be more human and appealing, one has to guard against Greek popular distortion and levity. Hermes, for example, was the patron of merchants, travelers, glib talkers, and thieves, which attributions probably derive at second hand from the fact that he was divine messenger. There was no aspect of cunning and trickery in the Egyptian Thoth. That didn't happen until it was expressed in Greece and Rome. The Egyptian god forms were carefully prescribed by the priesthood, who had a great knowledge of the psychological effects of angles and line. Thus, much can be gained from contemplation of Egyptian imagery, and its simplicity of form makes it easy to remember, visualize, and hold in the imagination. The Greek gods, on the other hand, are very much more human, being in fact idealizations of human types. Thus, the main Western pantheons, the Egyptian tends to give, thus, of the main Western pantheons, the Egyptian tends to give the inner esoteric side to the divine forces, and the Greek to the outer, more human side. Roman mythology is largely derivative from Greek, the Romans being too pragmatic to bother much about inner forces, save as a means of furthering their material ambitions. The Assyrian gods and goddesses are worth study, for the East does not tend to repress its subconscious as the West does, while the Norse is valuable in that it may have more appeal to the Nordic mentality, and it looks the harder facts of life straight in the eye. For life in the North was for purely climatic reasons much harder than life around the Mediterranean. What did you get from that? What I got from this is just thinking about the essence and the expression of a thing, right? So there's a pure essence of what these deities represent, but they express themselves through time and through culture. So really, if you analyze the gods of a culture, that kind of shows you the level of the culture itself. If the culture is not worried about spiritual matters, the gods are going to express themselves in a more human and material way. But if the culture is more spiritual, then the gods and the pantheons are going to also reflect that spiritual inclination. So what we have is, as we go through time, as we get closer and closer to the present, we find that our culture becoming more and more materialistic. And so our gods are also becoming more and more materialistic. Most people only pray when they need something. Whereas in the past, I'm sure most people made a very strict routine of prayer and devotion of their time and attention to the specific deities that they work with. And I like also that he says here that the Assyrian gods and goddesses are worth study. And I would also even say the Vedic pantheon. He says, because the East does not tend to repress its subconscious as the West does. That's important because, again, as I've been studying the mythology of the Hindu pantheon, it's kind of surprising because there's a lot of things and stories that these gods are doing, and from Vishnu and Shiva and Brahma and everyone else. There's a lot of things that they actually do that you wouldn't hear about a Christian god doing. And the reason being is because, like he says here, the East does not tend to repress its subconscious like we do. So because we repress our subconscious, everything about sexuality is completely taken out of Christianity, right? Because it's repressed. Now that has an effect on the people. That has an effect on the culture. When energy is not expressed naturally, it will find another outlet. And we see that in our world today. Happy reviews, peace. Joe Dickerson, peace. Nuru says, scry the relation between the words tarot, Taurus, torsion, turn, tree, truth, Thoth, Thor, tornado, trance, all cognates of Thoth, mastery of all Taurus fields, ascension back to spirit from matter. tarot, Taurus, torsion, turn, tree, truth, Thoth, Thor, tornado, trance. Swirling. Chill will, peace. 23. Nehru says they all indicate a spinning tree or torsion field, a torus. Almost like that. Which is essentially a 3D depiction of this 2D image. Notice that there's a silhouette of a man on the inside of that. I wonder if that's an indication of what you could be visualizing on a regular basis. I wonder if that would be helpful in any way. "23. By a careful consideration of the whole variety of God forms, a considerable store of occult knowledge and wisdom can be built up, and this is essentially a process under the province of Hod. 24. The other method of Hod working is that of magic, for magic is essentially a process of building forms for forces to indwell, and Hod is the Sephirah of magical forms. The other method of Hod working is that of magic. What is magic? Magic is essentially a process of building forms for forces to indwell. Magic is essentially a process of building forms for forces to indwell. And Hod is the Sephirah of magical forms. The names and versicles, symbols of Hod, are the writings the magician has which symbolize and describe the potencies with which he is working. They are, in fact, talismanic forms of those potencies. 25. The apron, which has Masonic associations, is the characteristic garment of the craftsman, the maker of forms, which, of course, the magician is. That the forms may be mental or astral rather than physical is only a difference of level, not function. A difference of level, not function. It can be physical, it can be astral, it can be mental. But that's just dealing with what level of force you're working with. This should be useful information for those of you who are doing sigil magic, working with different entities and deities, and doing the work of creating your own connections with the inner planes. The apron also covers the moon center or the loins, as the layman covers the sun center or breast. And it will be remembered that Thoth is a god of the moon, from which he derives his name of Tehuti. So in other words, with the man being in the background, the apron, which is a symbol of Hod, is covering up this moon center. The privacies, the privies. 26. As a last consideration, there is an interesting tradition which says that the B'nai Elohim, the sons of God, were sons and daughters of other spheres who came down to earth in very early times and mated with humans, producing a race of wisdom, the like of which has never been seen since. That must have been pretty awesome. The mating and the offspring, though holy at first, degenerated into evil beings of great power who had, in the end, to be destroyed. Ooh. This fact is said to lie behind many strange legends of all races, and the fact that these beings were androgynous and could use either sex at will is no doubt the foundation of such legends as that of Sodom. The magical image of Hod is, of course, the hermaphrodite, and the tracing through of such correlations, often very strange, of the magical alphabet of symbols is a pursuit of great interest and fascination. Though, as with all fascinating pursuits, particularly esoteric ones, it is well not to let one's enthusiasm go too unleashed, for there is a very treacherous and shifting boundary between the virtue and the vice of Hod, truth and falsity. Oh boy. That last part was quite a warning. Though, as with all fascinating pursuits, particularly esoteric ones, it is well not to let one's enthusiasm go too unleashed, for there's a very treacherous and shifting boundary between the virtue and the vice of Hod, which is truth and falsity. Oh boy. Oh boy. I mean, the level of wisdom and intelligence of the ancient world, like you said there, we haven't seen it since. One can only imagine what those previous civilizations were like. So even as we study more about yoga and more about Kabbalah, it is probably going to be a great thing to revisit some of the things that you studied previously with a new pair of eyes. Because previously when you studied mythology and some of these different systems, we approached it with no kind of foundation whatsoever. But I find that looking back at some of the older things now, with what I've learned about the Vedic science and what I've learned about Kabbalah, I'm able to see more into the essence of what these things were trying to express. Good stuff, good stuff. Hod being the Sephirah of forms, and Netzach being the Sephirah of the forces that give power to these forms. A Shiva and his Shakti. An archetype and the power behind the archetype. The image that we grab access to and the force behind it that we're utilizing. Because isn't that what is happening? Isn't that what's happening when we deal with something like, oh, I don't know, the goetic spirits, right? Where we'll have an image, a form, and that there's a force that is represented by that form. Two aspects, the study and the practice. We can memorize the names and what they represent, but we don't come into a true experience with that force until we actually go through the evocation or the dharana of these forces to bring this into, because like what he said, as far as where's that, a bit earlier, as far as how the difference between the images stored in Yasod versus the images of Hod, what we're dealing with is the realm of the imagination and what we think here. And then here we're dealing with forms that have been already set in motion. Forms that have been placed there through constant repetitive work and quite possibly from a higher plane. So that's what we're getting into when we tap into these goetic spirits. These goetic spirits and others like them aren't necessarily something that somebody came up with in their imagination. They are links to archetypal forces. The goetic spirits are links to archetypal forces. And the way that we access them is the same way that we access the force behind any form. It's through one pointed concentration on the symbols themselves. Interesting. Likewise, that's what we have going on here. Same exact thing we've got going on here. The Sri Soundarya Lahiri, which can be seen as a grimoire, but of course it gets a bit more intricate because there are 400 pages of depth as far as the working of this goddess and what that experience is like. And if you study this close enough, you'll see that this isn't actually a pantheon of multiple gods and goddesses. This is the one being split out into many different aspects which we can utilize. And that's exactly what's happening with this text here. There's over 100 different ways to access the divine experience of the goddess. Not just one, but 100 plus. But this is what you're going to find in any grimoire, in any system. You're going to find different angles to approach the divinity behind. Cool beans. Sunshine Chick says, just a quick question. Since Kabbalah is Judaic mysticism, wouldn't it serve us well to go directly to those sources instead of getting a Kabbalah interpretation from Western occultists? So technically there's like 3 different streams of Kabbalah, right? That's why we have Kabbalah spelled with a C, Kabbalah spelled with a K, and Kabbalah spelled with a Q. There is one that is coming purely from a Hebraic standpoint. And in that case, it does serve well to go straight to the Hebraic sources. But the path that I study currently is the one that is carved through the European system, which is a slightly different interpretation of what's happening with the Hebraic system. It seems that the version of Kabbalah that we're studying currently draws a lot from other sources, not just the Hebraic system. If you wanted to get into the strictly Hebraic Kabbalah, then that's you're gonna find works by Aryeh Kaplan and what's that guy's name? I don't want to say it wrong, but there's the Kabbalah with a K typically is the one that deals straight with Hebrew mysticism. I mostly focus on Kabbalah with a Q. And like I said, the main difference is that Kabbalah with a K is purely sticking to the Hebrew tradition, whereas with the Q, it derives from multiple sources, the Vedic source being a primary one. So it's 3 different angles really to approach the same type of thing. Nuru says, in meditation samadhi, the magnetic fields between the Sephirah link and the first tree, your DNA, to the specific harmonic in phase with Earth and Sun's fields. When this happens, the second tree forms. Tree Marie says, check the Mahavidyas. Yes. That's what the Swami says all up and down in this book. Definitely something to keep in mind at all times. If you can remember those 4 easy Mahavidyas, that would definitely be something useful to meditate on frequently. Yeah, Hakate says Kabbalah with the K was Hermetic system. Yes, Kabbalah with the K is more Jewish approach. Okay, so that chapter was fairly short compared to some of the others. It's all good. So next time we're going to be covering Yesod, the foundation, the storehouse of images. And I think that we will find a lot of connection with what the Vedic system terms Chitta, storehouse of memory. I certainly believe that there's a deep connection between those two things. And I think that the text will illustrate at least why I would believe that. You can make your own decision. But I do see the two systems of Samkhya and Kabbalah with a Q being very much connected. Sri Marie says Yesod equals Chandra equals Chitta. Yeah. See, this is another big reason why the study of the archetypes and the Hindu gods would be very useful, because we start to see what they represent and they tie into some of these words and concepts. Chandra is the deity associated with the moon and Tuesday. Chandra, Chitta. Yeah, that's nice. That's nice. Thank you for that. Yang asks, is there a missing aspect of the Kabbalah at the top middle? No, not missing. I believe you're referring to Thoth. It appears that way because it represents a previous state. It represents the change or the shift. So, of course, you'll see that missing, well, not missing, but that blank space. Dion Fortune says it would be more accurately depicted. I think that was actually William Gray. Says it would be more easily depicted if that was actually cut out of the picture. Because really, in a perfect world, in the unmanifest, we have four sephira, right? We've got the king, the crown, we got the scepter of power, we've got the throne, and then we got the kingdom itself. In a perfect world, that's complete harmony and balance. But what has happened is that the kingdom has fallen into incarnation. So now knowledge has to become aware of itself. Knowledge is experiencing itself. So now the kingdom has fallen all the way down to the bottom. In a way, it's kind of stretched out. This is the foundation, and this was originally the bottom, right? The foundation is the base. But what we have here is that knowledge has been spread out into time and space, and it's experiencing itself. So this represents a level of consciousness, a level of awareness. We exist within time under this barrier. Now, once this barrier is crossed, eventually at some point in your existence, maybe soon, or maybe in an unfathomably long time from now, once this barrier is crossed, then the experience of being outside of incarnation will be as if all this is resolved back into its original point. So it's not missing, it's just that from our angle down here, it appears as such. But at some point in our evolution, when we're seeing it from the unmanifest angle, all of this will appear as one sphere in Thoth, known as knowledge. And what is that knowledge? It's the knowledge of self. And by knowledge of self, I don't mean your ego, I mean knowledge of yourself on a cosmic scale. The knowledge that will enable you to wear the crown, to wield the scepter of power, to sit on the throne, and to rule the kingdom. And once that cross happens, then you are taken to another experience of existence. There's no more incarnating in this realm once that barrier is crossed. A good way to think of that is, millions of sperm might be chasing toward the egg, but only one actually crosses that barrier. And according to science now, I don't remember being that small, but once the sperm cell hits that egg, it closes up immediately, so no other sperm cells can enter it. it immediately shifts and changes, and it's game over for the rest. That's how it works when one crosses that line. All of creation now is reabsorbed into its primordial aspect, into its potential aspect. By Phoebe says, I was applying the Mahavidyas to the tree, since there are 10 too. Oh yeah. All right. Good stuff. Good stuff. We finished kind of early, but that's okay. We will return again on Friday. Friday is probably going to be the day that we continue with Yasad. So you got lots to think on, lots to do further research on. And I hope that you have a splendid evening. I certainly will. I think I need to catch up on sleep, to be honest. Good day, good life. Good day, good life. What do I have? I made some kind of notes. So abundance is wealth, right? Wealth is abundance. And that doesn't just mean money. That could also be represented as knowledge, wisdom, kindness. You've got a wealth, you've got an abundance of something. The way to make sure that wealth remains in your existence is by circulating that wealth, right? The same, and I've been thinking about this since we covered that one part in the chapter of Netsack, where it talked about the elementals and how they work, which is a pretty universal thing. When one of the elementals gains enough knowledge and wisdom, it has no choice but to go back to the other elementals and assist them in refining their experience as well, right? There's a ton of elementals in my backyard, like so much going on back there, but they exist everywhere, right? Life force and intelligence is everywhere. Now, it just so happens that on our frequency, it exists as human beings, and we can see and communicate with each other on our level. But life force continues to incarnate even in aspects that may not have physical form. So we're talking about intelligence. We're talking about data that is self-organized and somewhat self-aware. They can be considered lower life forms, but only in comparison to our ability of being self-aware. These things in the West are typically called elementals. And in the East, there's another name for them. I forgot again. It's like Buddha something. And these elementals were also known to be Shiva's personal army. And I'm getting a lot of goetic inclination there. But what I'm saying is that even though these elementals, the way that they evolve is they gain wisdom through experience and time, and they begin to educate others of their kind, and the process continues. Now, eventually, one of the paths of evolution for an elemental is to take residence in a human body. And we talked about this previously in the Agora book, how they talk about a certain ritual where some of the priests would, for a couple who's unable to bear children, they go to one of these Brahmins or priests or whatever, and they do a ritual that allows one of the elementals to inhabit the womb, and that's what allows and assists this couple to have a baby. That's one of the ways that these elementals can incarnate. But the main thing I'm saying here is that this seems to be the process of evolution. One begins to gain more information, gain an abundance of this data, and then proceeds to share this data. So abundance isn't meant to be hoarded and kept to yourself. What I'm saying here is that maybe it'd be a good idea to analyze what you have an abundance of. What is it that you have an abundance of? Do you have an abundance of money? Do you have an abundance of wisdom in a particular field? Do you have an abundance of food, of, like I said, knowledge on a specific thing? If so, maybe the next step for you is to learn and figure out how you can disperse that abundance, how you can share that abundance. Because I'm telling you, when you give stuff that you have an overwhelming amount of, it only comes back to you in a higher form. So, to assist all of creation in this process of evolution, see how you can share what you have an abundance of. How can you share what you have an abundance of? This act of compassion aids in spiritual evolution because as you help others to expand, you yourself begin to expand by default. So, how can we contribute? How can we continue to assist in the liberation of consciousness that is contained within matter? That includes the consciousness contained in insects and plants and rocks and bugs, let alone other people and pets and animals, right? Even being kind and compassionate and loving to animals, even that is feeding nature, feeding prakriti, feeding matter, and assisting in the liberation of consciousness from matter. So if one of the prime results of this science is so that all sentient beings can experience liberation, one of the easiest ways to do that is to give. Give. What do you have an abundance of? Whatever you have an abundance of, that's a sign that maybe you should assist with that. Right? A lot of what's in abundance, what is necessary for life on this planet is found in abundance. We need air to breathe, and there is more than enough air for everything. We need water to survive, and there's more than enough water. There's more water than there is anything else, right? We talk about these crystals and how they assist us as well. There's more than enough quartz crystals on this planet. Matter of fact, there's so much that that's probably the least monetary valued crystal of all, but probably because we need that one the most, and we use that crystal in almost all of our electronics. So it seems that what the world needs, what life needs, comes in abundance. So what do you have in abundance that you can give back to creation? There's a little something that may help your karma. Okay. Peace to everybody, and I hope you have a wonderful night. I hope you have a wonderful night. Ra keeps saying, I keep joining back to this live when it's describing what I'm doing at the moment. So trippy. Yeah, there's a connection. There's a connection on a deeper level. It's not just some guy in his shining, glittery room talking about magical stuff. There's a connection happening at a deeper level. I'm not saying that I am initiating it, but I'm a part of it, just like you're a part of it. You open a channel for things to flow through. That's what we do. That's what we do. All right. So I am tapping out so that I can tap in. Hope you guys had a wonderful holiday. I don't really celebrate holidays, but I know you guys do. So hope you enjoyed your holiday today. Good things are coming. That's for sure. Great things are coming. Amazing things. Brilliant things. So keep yourself open to receive. And even more so, keep yourself open to give. Keep yourself open to give. Somebody needs what you have to offer. And giving to somebody may be more fulfilling than you realize. Especially when to you it might be very easy to give. And to somebody else it may mean the world to them. That's a beautiful feeling when you're able to help somebody with something that comes natural to you. So not just giving because it's going to be good for your karma, but also giving because it's going to help you evolve as well. Kindness is free. Gratitude is free. Love is free. Alora says, get sleep, Trev. All right. I guess that means I'm rambling. Fine. All right. So, have a good night. Enjoy yourselves. This has been a wonderful reading, as usual. Have a great night. This is TK Trav, aka Travis Magus, here with LVX777. Peace.